Who is Gemma in Insidious? Out of the further. Character explained. Warning: major spoilers. Gemma is the central protagonist of Insidious. Out of the further. Played by Amelia Eve, she is a single mother whose family has a mysterious connection to the further. What makes Gemma different is that she isn't simply capable of entering the supernatural realm. She can bring things from the further into the real world, making her the key to Cyrus Lamb's plan. So, who exactly is Gemma in Insidious? Out of the further? Gemma is the character who drives almost the entire story. Unlike previous Insidious protagonists, she doesn't initially understand that she has any connection to the supernatural. She begins the movie as an ordinary mother trying to protect her daughter, Maya, while dealing with a painful history involving her own mother. But when strange events begin happening around her home, Gemma discovers that her family's past is connected to the further. And what she eventually learns about herself changes everything. Who plays Gemma? Gemma is played by Amelia Eve, who leads Insidious, Out of the Further as the new protagonist of the franchise. The character gives the series a different perspective because Gemma isn't simply a victim of supernatural activity. She eventually discovers that she has a unique ability that makes her extremely important to both the living world and the further. That ability is also the reason Cyrus becomes interested in her. Is Gemma psychic? Not exactly. Gemma has abilities that resemble the supernatural gifts seen in previous Insidious movies, but her connection to the further is different. She can enter the further, but that's only part of what makes her unusual. Gemma can also bring objects and entities from the further into the physical world. That makes her something like a living bridge between the two dimensions. And once Cyrus discovers what she can do, Gemma becomes the most important person in his plan. What is Gemma's connection to the further? Gemma's connection goes back to her childhood. Her mother, Ingrid, experienced supernatural events and struggled to understand what was happening to her. Gemma grew up believing that Ingrid was simply unstable. She didn't realize that her mother was dealing with something supernatural. As Gemma begins investigating her family's history, she discovers that Ingrid possessed a similar connection to the further. That means Gemma's abilities aren't random. They appear to be inherited. Her family has been connected to the further for generations. And Gemma is now the person who has inherited that ability. Why is Gemma so important to Cyrus? Cyrus is trapped in the further. He wants to escape and return to the world of the living. But he can't simply walk through the barrier whenever he wants. He needs someone who can create a bridge between the two worlds. Gemma is that person. Her ability allows her to move things between the further and reality. So Cyrus sees Gemma as a potential gateway. He doesn't necessarily want to kill her. He wants to control her. If he can force Gemma to use her ability, he can potentially escape the further. And he can bring other spirits with him. That's what makes Gemma so important to the story. She's not simply the person being hunted. She's the key to the entire supernatural conflict. What about Maya? Gemma is also a mother. Her daughter, Maya, is the most important person in her life. That relationship becomes one of the movie's biggest emotional elements. Cyrus understands that Gemma's love for Maya is also her greatest weakness. If he threatens Maya, he knows Gemma will do almost anything to protect her. That allows him to manipulate Gemma. But it also becomes the reason Gemma refuses to give up. Everything she does ultimately comes back to protecting her daughter. What happens to Gemma's mother? Gemma's relationship with her mother, Ingrid, is important because it changes how she understands her childhood. For years, Gemma believed her mother's behavior was caused by mental illness and addiction. She never understood why Ingrid was so terrified. But once Gemma begins experiencing the further herself, she realizes that Ingrid may have been dealing with exactly the same supernatural forces. Her mother's warnings suddenly make sense. Ingrid wasn't necessarily imagining things. She was struggling with the reality that Gemma herself is now experiencing. That realization gives Gemma a new understanding of her mother's death. Does Gemma enter the further? Yes. Gemma eventually learns how to consciously access the further. But her experiences are different from those of previous astral travelers. She isn't simply visiting the realm. She's connected to it in a much more physical way. She can interact with objects there and eventually learns that she can move them between dimensions. That discovery becomes essential to defeating Cyrus. What is a courier? One of the movie's most important concepts is the idea of a courier. A courier is essentially someone capable of transporting things between the further and the physical world. Gemma is one of these rare individuals. That's why her power is so valuable. Most people who enter the further are vulnerable to its spirits. Gemma eventually realizes that she can use the rules of the further against the entities living there. And that's what allows her to turn the tables on Cyrus. How does Gemma defeat Cyrus? Cyrus believes that Gemma's power will allow him to escape. But Gemma eventually realizes that she doesn't have to fight him directly. She can simply send him back. Her ability works in both directions. If she can bring something out of the further, she can also push something into it. So during the climax, Gemma uses her power to reverse Cyrus' plan. She sends Cyrus and the other entities back into the further. But she doesn't stop there. Gemma ultimately transports her entire house into the supernatural realm. That effectively traps the demons inside their own world. Cyrus wanted Gemma to become his doorway out. Instead, she turns herself into the reason he can't escape. Does Gemma survive? Yes. Gemma survives the final confrontation. She also manages to protect Maya. More importantly, she finally understands her own abilities. At the beginning of the movie, Gemma is frightened by the supernatural events surrounding her. By the end, she has learned how to control them. That is the biggest transformation in her character. She isn't simply surviving the further anymore. She's learning how to use its rules. Is Gemma more powerful than Elise? That's difficult to say. Elise Rainier remains one of the most experienced characters in the franchise when it comes to understanding the further. But Gemma has a very different type of power. Elise is an experienced psychic and astral traveler. Gemma is a courier. Her ability allows her to physically manipulate the boundary between the further and the living world. That could potentially make Gemma extremely powerful. However, power isn't necessarily the same as experience. Gemma is still learning. Elise understands the further far better. That's why their relationship becomes important. Elise can teach Gemma how to survive and control what she can do. Why does Elise help Gemma? Elise recognizes that Gemma isn't simply another person being attacked by a demon. She understands that Gemma has a rare ability. Instead of treating that power as a curse, Elise helps Gemma understand it. Their relationship also connects out of the further to the previous movies. Even though Gemma is the new protagonist, Elise remains part of the franchise's supernatural mythology. She becomes something of a guide for Gemma. What happens to Gemma at the end? After defeating Cyrus, Gemma survives. Her daughter is safe. But her relationship with the further hasn't simply disappeared. In fact, she now understands that the supernatural realm is connected to her family. That's important because Gemma can't simply forget what happened. She now knows what she is capable of. And that could have consequences in the future. The movie therefore gives her a victory while leaving her story open. Is Gemma the new main character of Insidious? Potentially, yes. The franchise has traditionally moved between different families and protagonists. The Lambert family dominated the first movies. Elise later became the center of the last key. Now Out of the Further introduces Gemma. Her unique ability also gives the franchise a new direction. Instead of simply asking how characters can escape the further, future stories could explore what happens when someone can control the boundary between both worlds. That's a much bigger supernatural concept. Final answer. So, who is Gemma in Insidious? Out of the Further? Gemma is the film's main protagonist, played by Amelia Eve. She's a single mother raising her daughter Maya, but she eventually discovers that her family has a long-standing supernatural connection to the further. Her mother, Ingrid, experienced similar phenomena, and Gemma inherits a rare ability known as the Courier ability. Unlike ordinary astral travelers, Gemma can do more than enter the further. She can move objects and supernatural entities between the further and the physical world. That's what makes her so important to Cyrus Lamb. Cyrus is trapped in the further and wants to return to the world of the living. He believes Gemma can provide the doorway he needs. He manipulates her through her greatest vulnerability, her daughter Maya, hoping to force Gemma to use her ability for his benefit. But Cyrus makes one major mistake. He assumes Gemma's power belongs to him. Instead, she learns to control it herself. During the final confrontation, Gemma reverses Cyrus' plan. She sends Cyrus and the other entities back into the Further and ultimately transports her entire house into the supernatural realm, trapping the creatures on the other side. Gemma survives. Maya survives. And Gemma finally understands what her family's supernatural ability really means. Her story is therefore more than another Insidious possession story. Gemma isn't simply someone trying to escape the Further. She's someone who can control the doorway between the Further and our world. And that could make her one of the most important characters in the future of the Insidious franchise. Because the biggest question surrounding Gemma isn't whether she can enter the Further. We already know she can. The real question is, what happens when Gemma learns exactly how much power she has over both worlds?